Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cuberviews, episode 45. This is your host, Ian Braverman. Today, I am joined by Tyler Reed. How are you doing today?
Doing great, Ian. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm always happy to talk about Cube. What can I say? How's your day going so far?
Not too bad. Mostly, I just cubed. I said I gotta get a few reps in this afternoon. Gotta test the cube. Gotta see how it feels before I talk about it.
Oh, yeah, of course. And I got the Cube brain because I was just at Cube for a Cause this past weekend. It was a great event. Just got a ton of Cube in, got ninth place, which is pretty cool. Not top eight,
Nice.
but to be honest, I'm kind of happy I didn't get top eight because I would have had to stay there for like 4 more hours. And I was already pretty tired when I got home late.
How many rounds did you have to play?
Oh, it was already like 9, 10 rounds or something.
Oh yeah. Listen, that play mat will be there next time. It's fine. You don't need another one. You already got 20 on your shelf, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. I got the playmat wall.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for coming on. If people somehow haven't seen it yet, Tyler did the art for Cuberviews, the new art, and I love it with Flicker the Bird. And Tyler has a website, funnylittleguys.com. So everyone go check that out. Tell me a little about the art that you do.
Yeah, so I'm trained as a designer, but I've really found a lot of passion in illustration. So really kind of what I've been working on the last few years has been sort of mascot focused. It's kind of unfortunate that within the last few months, people have started to really hate on the rubber hose sort of like old school, like retro 50s, like kind of mascots. Like I feel like that has really kind of become very prevalent. And I'm like, oh, I was already doing that kind of thing. So now I've just kind of been like, let's make them wacky. Let's do some crazy stuff. So yeah, making Flicker the Bird, which is just sort of incidentally just happened to kind of come up with that. Well, it's kind of close to your bird, which can you remind me again what your bird's name is?
It's Kiwi the Dusky Conure.
Oh, and so we sort of happened upon that inspiration. I was like, why not make it feel like Ian? Because it is your podcast. So I was like, we should make it, and you already like band colors. And of course, birds love to flicker. We already know that. So it just felt like a perfect choice. I'm a little upset that we didn't go with the soul herder route, but I feel like maybe, the sort of like biblically accurate angel motif probably wouldn't have landed as universally as you probably would have liked. But, that's here nor there.
That felt a little bit intense compared to just a cute bird.
Yeah. These people just aren't ready for the dark machinations of my mind.
Yeah. If anyone needs any great art done, definitely reach out to Tyler on Discord or something. And you're also the owner of the Cincinnati Cube Discord. And we were talking about that you ran a Cincinnati Cube event earlier this year. Tell me about that event.
Yeah, so part of my history of Magic is that I basically immediately decided I wanted to cube. I said, I'm getting into Magic because I see the value of cube as a format. So I got into Magic because I wanted to build a Bloomburrow set cube. Like I had like just a bunch of friends just draft it and it was fine. And then I was like, I have like kind of like a personal Discord. So I said, everyone just go ahead and join this so then I can like ping everyone to do this again. And then it just became like, I was like 8 people and then 9 and then 10. And then there was a few pockets of people kind of in the area that were kind of like either drafting at home or drafting at local stores. And so I just kind of transformed it into a Magic Cube Discord account. So I turned it on professional and I started doing branding for it. Had everyone kind of pick out like a name for it. We're the Cincinnati Cube Club. And so then eventually I just said I wanted to have the Cincy Cube Club Con C3 and then C4. It's kind of, a little controversial that I decided to call it event C4, but, here nor there. And so, yeah, so it was a 72-person Cube event that happened in Mason, Ohio. We were hosted at Mavericks. They basically let us host it for free. So great, incredible. I basically got a hookup. His name is Rusty. He's moderator for the $30 value vintage Discord. So, I feel like we're kindred spirits in that way. I feel like we're both sort of like underrated formats that not enough people are experimenting with. But he basically gave me the connection to Mavericks. And he said, yeah, they got plenty of space. They like literally doubled their size of their like event space before we started there. It was a great venue. They had a food truck. That was cool. So it had pretty much everything you possibly could need. And looking forward to doing more.
That's awesome. We were talking a little bit before we started recording that it can be a little daunting to decide to put on a Cube event, that sometimes the haters will say, you'll never get to a full event. But that's
right.
That's awesome when it all comes together and you have an awesome community coming together, people coming out of town. And speaking of Cube events, There's going to be ConnectiCube happening February next year. 64-person cube event, February 14th and 15th, 2026, outside of Hartford. The Discord link will be in the description of the episode. And you're also the host of the podcast No Repeat. Tell me about that.
Yes. All right, cool. So I guess we'll talk about this then. Yeah, so I am a podcaster. I would say hobbyist level, because we have a Patreon that makes basically enough to cover the bills, posting, etc. But yeah, it's called No Repeat. Me and my two friends, we choose 3 songs every week, no repeats, no doers, to create the perfect playlist for any occasion life throws at you. We have challenges such as getting buzzed at the zoo, wrestler intro songs, stadium anthems, 9 p.m. in late July in a mid-sized Rust Belt town. Very normal challenges that are submitted by our community members, and we pick one song and we can never pick the same one again. So it's like, nope, we cannot choose Stairway to Heaven again. You get it once only.
Very cool. I had a feeling you were a podcaster or something, because when we were recording, I was like, that's a really nice microphone. You're doing something with that.
Yeah, I'm not just doing it for the Zoom calls. It's no one's just buying a podcast rig to talk with their coworkers across the country.
Yeah. So you mentioned that Bloomburrow is kind of like the start of when you were really getting into Magic. What about it was so fun for you? What inspired you so much? And what made you want to build a whole cube about it? Speaking of, we're going to be talking about the Bloomburrow Modified Set Cube today. I should have said that before.
It's okay. It was going to come eventually. So I've basically played most card games in some capacity. There's been a lot that have come out in the last year or so it feels a little bit harder to say. As a kid, I started playing card games basically as young as I could, because Pokemon TCG came out. I was 8, whatever. I got those cards. Did I ever play Pokemon? No. Doesn't matter. I
didn't know the rules at all, but we were trading on the bus. We were probably trading $50 cards for 1-cent cards. It was great.
Yeah. So it started there, and I played the Digimon TCG that was basically very short-lived and did not have a lot of distribution. Played DBZ. So I played a whole bunch of stuff like that. I played Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Was kind of the game that I actually went to tournaments and stuff for, kind of elevated beyond just the playground stuff. And so that was kind of during the GOAT era. So very early into the game. And then of course the series immediately following was the superhero theme set. And I said, I don't care about this anymore. I'm not going to play this game. And so then Hearthstone came out, and then I got really into that.
Oh, I love Hearthstone.
Yeah. I play Hearthstone Battlegrounds almost every single day. Great auto battler, great to eat during. Gives you a lot of time in between turns where I can eat my oatmeal.
I would do it while I was on the exercise bike.
See, there you go. It's perfect. But, kind of during that time, I was kind of already playing board games. I worked at Board Game Bar. And so all of my favorite games were already kind of deck building in a way. Dominion was great. Race for the Galaxy is probably one of my favorite games of all time. I always loved card-focused games. I mean, literally, Bloomburrow was starting to come out, and I said, I think I want to give it a try. I was really excited about the style of it, because people who have now looked at my website, funnylguys.com, will see that I draw a lot of animals. I also was a dungeon master. There was a sort of alternative third-party world called Humblewood that I sort of ran an entire campaign about. And so that was everyone was a funny little animal creature. And so kind of doing that kind of then led me, I think, to then seeing Bloomburrow coming out and said, I'm just going to do it. I, at the very least, I like the art of this, and I want to collect them, at least for the artistic perspective of it. And I just kind of made the decision. I almost coin flipped and just oh, I'll go to a pre-release. It was like that. I was like, all right, well, I'm hooked. So, and I've played Magic before. I distinctly remember in college, someone handed me an elf deck. And of course, back then it was 2010. People were kind of in a way playing kitchen table Magic. The formats weren't super well developed, I feel in that time. It was just an elf combo deck. And I was I played something. And he was like, you're not doing it right. And I was like, okay, cool dog. I don't know what any of these cards do. And so I feel I'd been deterred in a way from Magic in a way. In a way, I appreciate the artwork of Magic, but I think they didn't necessarily captivate me from a character design perspective that I feel I really latched onto. From my perspective, the Gatewatch, kind of the main sort of planeswalkers just didn't really appeal to me. They felt superhero adjacent. Didn't have a lot to latch onto. And I don't know, it just felt they just maybe didn't have as evocative as a design as some Yu-Gi-Oh stuff. It's a very different sort of style completely. I was a little bit more of a weeb back then. So it was a little bit more inclined to kind of be into Yu-Gi-Oh in that way. Yeah, so Bloomburrow looked cool, and I said, I'm going to play it.
So that's really cool that you got into Bloomburrow largely because of the art. And was that also a big consideration when designing the cube? So did you pick cards also because of particular art choices, or was it mostly mechanically driven?
So I would say that this has had many iterations. I would say I'm maybe not fully pleased with currently where it's at because I feel like I've cubed a lot since then and I have like kind of learned some different ways of expressing the gameplay that I want to have. But I would say that the main idea is that the cards feel of the world. I feel like there was either like a heuristic studies video or a Spice 8 Rack video where they kind of talked about Lorwyn in a way that was kind of like, well, there was no cards that directly killed anything. The damage was very middling. Like there wasn't a lot of like huge like blowout cards, and it felt like they were very of a world. And so I feel like I was trying to keep within that world. I've since sort of like expanded beyond just the Bloomburrow cards, but it is sort of like I do want the cards to feel like their artwork fits within that world that exists with it. But of course, it's kind of like a balance because I also just want it to feel fun and good and like competitive and interesting. So it's like a little bit of both, you know? It has to check both boxes. Is it like, can I reasonably find a version of this card that I feel like aesthetically looks appealing and feels kind of the world? And does it mechanically make sense within the mechanics of the cube?
So tell me more about Bloomburrow as a set and what the limited environment was like. Like there were a lot of great archetypes built in that were largely built around creature types like birds, rats, lizards, raccoons, rabbits, bats, otters, squirrels, mice, frogs, and each of
Yeah.
them, a lot of them, and each of them had like a mechanical uniqueness to them. Like they all had like a different type of thing that they were trying to do. Like lizards was like dealing damage to your opponent so that you could get some kind of benefit, and frogs was about blink, and squirrels was about the graveyard, and bats was about lifelink. Did you try and recreate these archetypes exactly like they were in the Bloomburrow set?
So I would say kind of transitioning from the set modified cube and kind of the one I'm kind of working on right now. I think the one that experiences the most iteration, most sort of like messing with is probably the birds. And I feel like they wanted to create a mechanic that was kind of different and sort of like beyond what birds were already kind of doing. Because like Azorius birds is not a new concept. There are probably tens, if not hundreds, of cards that are blue white birds that do some stuff. So it's like, well, what if we have it be flying and not flyers? And it just feels like it just doesn't quite work as much as you want it to.
Yeah, like the card
Um,
Salvation Swan, for example, I always found to be very awkward because it's like you're blinking your birds, but they already have flying. So you need to blink something that's not a bird. Like, I totally get what you're saying.
yeah, and so I've maybe made it a little bit more of a generic flying matters, just things that care about flying and giving bonuses to that. And so that's kind of like a major one that I feel like it didn't quite work. And by and large, I've tried to keep all of them pretty consistent to what they are because I think they're interesting. I would say that one thing that I felt like was a consideration was that squirrels are a pretty developed creature type in Magic. Thanks to, I believe, Modern Horizons 2. I believe they added a lot of extra support for that.
In Infinity
Um,
sets.
and Unfinity. Yeah, there are no Unfinity cards in here. We're not rolling dice. And so I would say that the squirrel mechanism, basically from Modern Horizons 2 and backwards, is mostly just as a spamming, sort of like go wide kind of strategy. For example, I am sort of like considering like cards like Chitter Splitter or sort of similar cards that are just kind of that can involve like kind of that go wide mentality. But really, the squirrels in this one are really kind of like the reanimator or sort of like sacrificing with the forge mechanic using food. And so it really did feel like you had to kind of cut off a lot of those cards from the card pool. They just didn't combine together in a way that felt coherent. So that was kind of like the major things that I think I had to consider. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like keeping them the same, those are kind of the major ones that I feel like I had to make most considerations for.
Squirrels was really interesting because they cared about food or exiling cards in the graveyard. I felt like often you were doing mostly like the exile the cards from the graveyard, but the food did come up sometimes in the set for sure.
Yeah, and I had played on Arena a little bit. Like I had made like the squirrel deck, and if you had the density of things that you needed, to pull it off. Like it was pretty good machine. Like you managed to get pretty consistent to either have the food or do the foraging. One of the two was going to go off pretty consistently. But that's kind of the struggle, is that I kind of wanted to almost feel like kind of like a constructed gameplay initially, because it felt fun to do those things. It felt cool to turn 2 play your Baker's Bane duo, which creates a food. Then you're in like turn 3 or whatever, you do something that sacrifices the food, then it creates something else. Like there's a nice feeling to that, but I feel like in Cube it's just very hard to sort of get that constructed gameplay. And I think if you manage to do that, that's like a good feeling. But I feel like as with limited play, it's never going to be perfect. I can try to hope that it gets close to that.
And as you mentioned, you are working on a newer version of the cube, actually. So we're kind of talking about 2 cubes this episode. So there's your Bloomburrow Modified Set Cube,
Yeah.
which is like much more of like a normal set cube that is focused on recreating the limited format from Bloomburrow. But then you also have the Bloomburrow Empire, which I think is really interesting, which also has a lot of focus on 3 color archetypes like Bant Flicker, Esper Hand Control, Grixis Wick Burn, Jund Treasure Tokens and Cascade, and then Naya Balin Token Populate. I always found that like Bant Flicker, I feel like was intended in the set. When I drafted that set, I felt like I would end up Bant Flicker, but that's just also just me. Bant Blink is just the archetype I always end up in. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there was kind of a transition period where I kind of cubed more and did more limited, more pre-releases, just drafted sets. And as I was kind of playing it, it's like, it really felt like there was a lot of situations where when you get duplicates of the same card, I'm like, does this feel exciting? Does this feel fun? Does this feel like what you really want to getting out of that experience? Like, I think my Edge of Eternity's pre-release, I ended up getting the 2 green fight spells that had to get errata. And then like the 2 guys that created like a lander. And it's like, oh man, I just wish I had any other card in here, just even for the sake of like just diversity of answers for things. And it's like, sometimes I felt like, oh, I just don't know if I really want a duplicate. The problem now is, well, this is a set that only has so many things in it. There's only so many creatures of each type. And so really what I kind of started to do is I started to build into the like non-creature spells portion of things, removed a lot of the duplicates there. I kept a duplicate if they felt meaningfully important. Just as an example, like Splash Portal, it says you blink something for very cheap, and if it's one of these types, you draw a card. For 1 mana, it's cheap, it does exactly what you need it to, and activates a lot of things there. And there's basically no other card that's not like a $50 card that does that. So I was like, well, I want to keep that. Whereas like maybe a card like Rabid Gnaw, which is just a red fight spell that gives you a +1. It's like, you don't need to see Rabid Gnaw twice. That's not going to do anything. And that's the core of like the evolution of my thought of it. And it's like, there are cards that feel close to the theme of Bloomburrow that, I kind of released the tension of saying this needs to only feature animals. I think for the creatures, they need to be creatures of those types of kind of relevant sort of like species. But for mostly for the instants and sorceries and enchantments, like let's let go a little bit. And then that kind of leaves more room to kind of free up a lot of the duplicates and kind of just add more interesting choices.
Like you were just saying, Bloomburrow only has 1 set compared to other sets like, let's say, a Ravnica Cube where you could pull from 12 sets or something, or even like they used to where they would have 3 set blocks, especially because Bloomburrow is such a synergy driven set. Each of the creature types have such a specific focus, like life gain or the heroic kind of theme. Were the duplicates like really important for being able to make some of these synergies work? Like having duplicates of like the very important synergy pieces?
Yeah. Importantly, like we kind of said, birds are plentiful. There's no shortage of bluebird, whatever. But like, so for example, there's a few otters that exist outside of Bloomburrow. Frolicking Familiar, which is from Eldraine, very good. Basically, it felt like they had really been preparing for the set for a long time because they kind of been like slowly introducing them. Then there was the Elusive Otter, also has Prowess. I think it was also from a different Eldraine set. Crazy that they did that twice. And then they had like the Thieving Otter from Ikoria, which is it just didn't feel like it was meaningfully doing anything. And so it felt like they really were trying to introduce like a spell smear side of thing for otters. And so one of the main things was, because the very, very first set cube I had done, it was literally the rarities distributed. And so they stockpiled so many of the otters in a higher rarity. Like they had given one planeswalker in there, it's like a monocolored mythic. You were just never going to see those creatures. You really did kind of want more instants and sorceries for that deck anyway, but it's like you just felt like you just could not see them enough to actually warrant going with that strategy. It was like, well, Thunder Trap Trainers are a really good card, and it's like, I think you should put 2 in there. It feels like a very simple card, feels good for flickering. Whereas I feel like Kitsa is like the mythic. It's good. It does a lot of things. And it's like, I don't know if I really need 2 of that in there. That feels a little too strong. I have made the decision to include 2 Heartfire heroes, which I feel like depending, I feel like, as a side note, I feel like people are going to have a lot of PTSD about this because there's so many like cards that have been banned from Standard because of this. So it's like, I don't ever want to see these stupid mice ever again. I get that. In this format, maybe not as powerful. They're definitely like a little bit weaker because, let's be honest, it probably should have been Monstrous Rage. Feel like without that card, it feels like it doesn't feel as overpowering in that instance. Really surprisingly, the mice overall have a pretty stock set of cards for being a relatively new sort of like creature type that they're playing with. The green rabbits felt very lacking in a way, and so it was like you kind of want to have both colors because they really go out of the way to make them be like, this is a 2-color pair. And so it's like, it was curious how just like not good some of them were. And so I've been making decisions on whether or not to like just completely axe a card that doesn't feel essential to a strategy, where it's like, one of them is like the Herbalist. If you attack with a token, he gets Death Rattle. And it's like, yeah, that's probably good, but like, you can see that coming. And it's like, is that really what? It's fine. We were talking about the duplicates. So yeah, so it's kind of like the need to kind of like make them feel like to beef them up to make them feel more impactful. I guess the one thing I will say is that a lot of the duplicates do come into frogs. They actually put a lot of frogs in the set, but a lot of them just didn't feel like as important as they were. So I felt like duplication for the frogs really felt important. It's very unassuming, but like Sunshower Druid is like extremely important for the frog synergy to go off because he costs 1. When he enters, he gives you a +1/+1 counter and he gains you life. So you being able to repeat that over and over again, really good. Because really, honestly, you're just trying to find a guy. You just need any guy that's cheap that can either bounce from the hand or you can flicker. And he works for both those. And so you need a lot of the density of those things that allow you to flicker to make that work. So that's kind of like where a lot of duplication feels like it needs to happen.
And this cube also includes cards from the Commander set. Like, for example, Jacked Rabbit. That card is really good. I've seen that in Vintage Cubes.
Vintage Cube All-Star.
Tell me about the impact of the card from the Commander set. Like, also another one that I saw in here is really cool is Murmuration. I just think this card is sick. 4 and a white, birds you control get +1/+1 in Vigilance. And being each end step, for each spell you've cast this turn, you get a 1/2 bird named Stormcrow. This card is great because it is like a splash if you wanted to go into like a Jeskai spell slinger, but it also just like pumps your birds. How do these Commander cards impact the draft format?
So I think the most interesting part is that it really adds a lot of removal. It feels like they really beefed up the removal suite in the Commander set because it's too good for Standard. It was really cool to find stuff like Calamity of Cinders, which is you can convoke it, and then it does 6 damage to each untapped creature.
Oh, that is good.
Yeah. So that's like a really good for like the Otter Spellslinger stuff. They included a special artwork of basically the suite of removal spells like Beast Within, Generous Gift, Rabid, Hybridization. Like they just included those in there. And I was like, sure, I'll throw them in there because most of them, they give them something. That kind of worked with like the gift mechanic. So it's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll throw those in there. It's interesting the way, like the removal that they've chosen because it feels like it's always the nuclear option. There's no like, -1/-1. It's either you're huge damage or nukes like one guy in particular. It does feel like there's a lot of combat in there. It's like, especially like Swarmyard Massacre. That's just a giant removal spell. I think it gives maybe a little bit more opportunity for it to be a little less aggro. Kind of before I had introduced those cards, I felt like it really was Boros Mice just plowing people over. Giving you a few more options to kind of throw that kind of stuff in there really gives things a little bit longer to kind of breathe. And then to maybe even get like a Hugs out, like a high value, like Fecund Green Shell, something like that. But yeah, mostly I thought it was just cool to have some extra cards that felt like were very flashy, felt almost a little Timmy-y. Still need more testing, I think.
And you already mentioned it, but I found the gift mechanic to be really cool. And it's interesting, like you were just saying, that a lot of the removal that you added to the cube kind of feels almost like gift. Like you were saying, like generous gift, which destroys something and gives your opponent a 3/3, or rapid hybridization, which also destroys something and gives the opponent a 3/3. Tell me about how having so much gift and removal that kind of doesn't make it as bad for your opponent affects the draft format.
So something that was kind of happening today when I was doing some play testing was that my friend was like, there's not that much card draw. Like I feel like one of the main things you kind of expect out of more of like a cube format, and this is something maybe I was like thinking about, you'll sometimes see like a blue section of like an instance in sorceries that's like draw a card, counter a card, draw, like bounce a card, and that's like duplicated between different cards of different names of varying like mana levels. I kind of felt like, oh, this set doesn't really have that kind of density of that. There's like one or two counters, and there isn't that much card draw, but it does make a lot of tokens. But I think one of the things that is kind of interesting is that the gift mechanic does kind of feel like it does kind of keep everyone in the game. How meaningful is that? I don't know. Like Into the Flood Maw is like gift a tapped fish. You're like, ain't nobody using that fish for anything important. Especially if you're removing like a non-land permanent, you pay like 5 mana for like a huge like enchantment. It's like that's not a good exchange. I am not happy with this gift at all. Whereas like a lot of the ones that gift a card are really kind of like a interesting choice. Like I think, for example, I think Wildfire Howl, which is gift a card, but it says it does 2 damage each creature. If you gift it, you do 1 extra damage, and it's like there's probably very limited chances you are going to make that active choice that 1 extra damage is going to matter. But, if your opponent dies from that, the gifting the card's pretty good. Maybe Consumed by Greed. You can gift a card, target opponent sacrifice a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. The gift was promised, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Like, maybe. There's not a lot of reanimator type effects, which is something I'm also kind of considering. So it's like, really the graveyard feels very dead in that way. So like maybe in a way, like, I don't know, is gifting the card worth getting back something that got blown up? Because like we said, cards are just dying left and right. There's lots of instant removal in that way. So I think it adds at the very least a little bit of tension, keeps your opponent kind of in the game in what could maybe be a little bit of a swingy format.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I thought that the gift mechanic was really interesting. Like one of my favorite cards with gift that I have in my Bant cube is Starfall Invocation, which is
Oh,
3
yeah.
white gifted card. Destroy all creatures. If the gift is promised, return a creature card put into your graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. So it's basically like you get to blink out one of your creatures, and like you get the death trigger too. I find that this is really interesting because you get to bring back something that died. You almost reanimate, but you have to give your opponent a card, especially like we were just saying in a format that maybe doesn't have as much card draw. So I think it's a really cool mechanic that I think people should maybe explore a little bit more in their own cube design.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, listen, you Starfall Invocation and you bring back a Visa, you're behind? Because let's be honest, you're not Starfall Invocation when you're ahead. I think that card is very good. I will say that this cube in general, there's a lot of like all-stars that are seeing standard play. And so it does sort of feel like it's pretty beefy in that way. Like I feel like there's a lot of sets that maybe don't have a lot of high level impact play on like standard. We'll see how much like Edge of Eternities actually does, but it's like those spaceships ain't never getting used. Like nobody's using a single one of the spaceships in standard, but like Starfall Invocation on the right situation, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think the set is pretty unique that one of the limited archetypes, basically mice, just completely destroyed standard, like we said.
Yeah.
And some cards that I spot on the list that you put in from other sets that just seem perfect, like Frolicking Familiar, like we mentioned, being an otter, caring about Spellslinger, being a spell and a creature. Another one that I thought was really cool was Crypt Rats, which is 2 and a black, 1/1. You can pay X and deal X damage to each creature and each player and only spend black mana on it. Like it's great. It's a rat, but it's also a board wipe.
Yeah.
And also like Soul Catcher. I saw that and that seemed really cool. Being a bird that grows when creatures die. It's really cool. You can like maybe splash that in like a little bit of a sacrifice deck too. Tell me about some of your favorite cards that you've included from other sets into the cube.
Sure. I think Dreadwing Scavenger in Dimir, it has a threshold mechanic, which is already what the rats are trying to do. And I feel like it really activates them. I feel like that was a really impactful card. I think overall, I am trying to maybe blur the lines a little bit where it's like other creatures can interact with other colors that are not the 2 color types. And then see how those feel, because just gives it a little bit more texture that makes it doesn't feel as rigid. And so I feel like Dreadwing Scavenger from Foundations was just like the exact part I feel like they needed. Because I think one of the biggest problems I think for the rat strategy is there wasn't a lot of surveil organically within Bloomburrow. The threshold mechanic was very hard to activate. And so that felt like a very essential card to put in there. Same thing with Ashroot Animist from Foundations as well. It's a wizard, but it feels like a very gruel thing to be doing. It has a high mana cost, so it works with expend. And I feel like it does the thing that kind of the raccoons are already trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's really cool, like you were just saying with the Dreadwing Scavenger, having creatures outside of their two-color pair and other archetype colors, like this being a bird that fits into Blink kind of, and also being a threshold card and filling the grave. These kind of cards just feel really cool that would make people want to splash into a third color potentially.
And I think most importantly, I love a Hydra. And so the Goose Mother I had to include a bird Hydra.
The Goose Mother's really good.
Yeah, it deals with food, sacrifice food, draw a card. Crazy that it's a flying Hydra, like it feels okay because you can blow it up with a lot of different stuff. But I feel like I was so immediately captivated by that card when I saw it. I was like, it's a silly card, but that's kind of like why I like Eldraine. Literally, I will say I almost got into Magic when Thrones of Eldraine came out because I thought Oko was cool. Probably good that I did because, as we know, it didn't last long on this earth. So,
yeah, I was gonna say that like Eldraine and Bloomburrow feel like they have so many crossovers that you can almost maybe build a Bloomburrow Eldraine cube.
And people have. Like I said, I've done a lot of digging on Cube Cobra because we were talking about sort of like my next iteration, which is like the Bloomburrow Empire, which is sort of talking about like, okay, so with the World Mind has like a Grixis effect attached to it. I originally didn't include that because it felt like, well, that's not what that color is trying to do. Do I want to encourage splashing in that way? Maybe it feels just like a commander card. I was unsure of like where its place would fit in there. And so I kind of then said, well, Eldraine has a whole bunch of cards that just make rat tokens in red. So I'm like, that's cool because that is spell slinging and then it makes tokens. So like Lord Skitter and all those guys all love just having rats on the board. So it's like, this is perfect. I'm going to throw it in there.
And tell me more about the Bloomburrow Empire and the differences that it really includes. Like looking at it, it does include more multicolored cards. It looks like it has more fixing. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is like more or less a kind of like a work in progress. I kind of just sort of sillily named it the Bloomburrow Empire. The fake lore is that like we're going to war. It's like the orcs are tearing down the trees in War of the Rings. They're sort of like amping things up, and it's like it's not just about playing nice. But really, I found cards in New Capenna that I thought were really cool and surprisingly had related creature types. Like the raccoon was introduced in that set, and so I was like, oh. And so I think what I decided is I like the Alara shards. New Capenna uses those. And so I was like, oh, these already kind of exists in the standard set of Bloomburrow, right? Because Balin is Naya, Wick is Grixis. Yeah, so those were kind of the main ones. They had Glarb, who was Sultai. I don't know, I felt like it was too many of different things. So Glarb and Helga, I felt like were almost direct to commander cards that were released in their standard set. So I decided not to include them. And that felt like, okay, I can kind of work around this 3-color combo here. And I felt like I could kind of see the lines. Because like we've been saying, the frogs want to flicker, the birds want to flicker in a way. And so like that just feels like it makes sense. And so now I'm kind of working towards like reducing the amount of duplicates of sort of like the non-creature spells and trying to include more interesting things.
Yeah, that's really cool. And tell me about some of your favorite decks that you've seen drafted recently.
As you kind of talk about like cool decks I've seen, I think one of the struggles of this set and kind of maybe what I'm trying to do in the Bloomburrow Empire as like sort of like a continuation of this concept is that I feel like people draft very narrowly. It has felt like sort of like see an animal, pick an animal. And so it's kind of been like, very much the 2-color combos as you would expect. And so I feel like for me, I've continuously just tried to get things as weird as possible, which is kind of where it starts to build like the Luminous Broodmoth kind of like combined with sort of the frogs. So flicker stuff, like seeing that card, which was a commander card. But yeah, using that kind of with the frog flicker stuff was just like, it just already makes sense. It just works. feel like I still want to see. I've managed to do kind of almost like a soul tie, sort of like spell slinger, because there's a lot of really cheap green instants using some of the otters for their spell swinging effects. Like Savor is just -2/-2, creates a food. Like there's a lot of like kind of like very spell swinging type things that you can kind of do in soul tie as well. But I mean, it's been a lot of pretty straightforward kind of like two color pairs, which is like I said, is what I'm kind of trying to fix.
I think it's really interesting to, like we were talking about, like expand past what the original set was built upon and see like between the lines other potential kind of decks that could exist, especially with non-creature spells that you can add in to augment different archetypes or different creatures of different sets that could add more texture to the cube.
And it's always kind of good just to throw in the infamous Cruel Claw. If you're playing either of those colors, that card's also a house. You can splash one in one of those two colors, and it'll probably be good.
How about we jump into a pack one, pick one here?
Sure. Sounds good.
I'll read off the pack. We got Bria Riptide Rogue, which is 2 blue red, 3/3 prowess. Other creature control prowess. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. That card is extremely powerful. I'm looking at that card and being like, oh my gosh. We have Chart a Course, classic. 1 and a blue, draw 2, then discard a card unless you attack this turn. Phineas, Ace Archer, green and white 2/2, Vigilance Reach. Whenever Phineas attacks, put a 1/1 counter on each creature control that's a token of rabbit. Then if creature control have total power 10 or greater, draw a card. That card's also really strong. These multicolor cards are really powerful. Bandit's Talent. I love this card. I have it in my Rakdos cube. 1 and a black for a class. When it enters, each opponent discards 2 cards unless they discard it on land. And then when you level it up to 2 for a black, at the end of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards, they lose 2 life. And then 3 and a black, level 3. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card for each opponent has 1 or fewer cards in hand. That card potentially has a lot of value. We have Bellowing Crier, 1 and a blue, 2/1. When it enters, draw then discard. Sugarcoat, 2 and a blue, flash, enchant creature or food. Enchanted permanent is a colorless food with 2, sack it, gain 3 life, and lose all abilities and types, so makes it into a food. Empyrean Eagle, 1 blue, white, flying. Other creature control with flying, get +1/+1, 2/3. Yeah, that just seems like a great card to include from outside of Bloomburrow to just augment like a Flyers deck. We have Quartzberry Cultivator, 1 hybrid black green, 2/3. Being of combat your turn, you may forage, which is like we were talking about, exile 3 cards in your grave or sack food. And whenever you forage, put a counter on it. Thornvault Forager. I saw this was one of the cards that you duplicated. This card seems really good. 1 and a green, 2/2 that you can tap for a green, forage, add 2 mana of any combination of colors. So it could potentially be a very strong mana dork. And then also you could just search your deck for a squirrel by tapping it and paying 3 and a green. So that's really good and put in your hand. Uncharted Haven. Enters tapped land, choose a color to add that color. Scales of Shale, 2 and a black, instant, costs 1 less to cast for each lizard you control, and it gives something +2/+2, lifelink, and indestructible. Parting Gust, I love this card. This is one of my favorite cards in the set. White, gift a tapped fish. So it does have the gift, but you can. That fish. Yeah, nobody cares about the fish. You can exile a non-token creature. If it wasn't promised, it comes back with a 1/1 counter on it. But if it was promised, it just doesn't come back. So it's a blink card or like a Swords to Plowshares kind of effect. And it puts counters. This card is great.
Does everything.
Lunar Convocation, 1 and a black. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained and lost life this turn, you get a 1/1 black rat with flying. And you can pay 1 and a black, pay 2 life, draw a card. Persistent Marsh Stalker. This card is really cool. I have it in my Changeling cube. Same with a few of the cards in this pack, actually. 1 and a black for a 3/1. It gets +3/+1 for each other rat you control. And if you have Threshold, so 7 cards in the grave, whenever you attack with 1 or more rats, you may pay 2 and a black. And if you do, return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking. So that's really strong. And then finally, Splash Portal, blue, sorcery, exile a creature control, return to the battlefield. And if it was a bird, frog, otter, or rat, you draw a card. So, I mean, sorcery speed blink, but 1 mana, blink something, draw a card is really good. Yeah, I mean, this pack has some cool directions. What are you thinking?
So, unfortunately, I feel like there's a correct choice and there's a fun choice. As you kind of said, Thornvault Forager feels very strong. I mean, it's like it immediately gets you a mana, and that's like already pretty good. It's got good stats. Like you said, Chart a Course, classic. Persistent Marshstalker is also like very highly pickable. Splash Portal is kind of like the lesser on the scale there, where it's like you're committing to one of those types. And it's like Bandit class also can be a fun build around, start to build around. Depends how much hand hate you want to have. So I feel like for me, probably between the Marshstalker and the Thornbolt Forager for me, it would be honestly a coin flip at that point.
That's interesting. I'm looking at a totally couple different cards. I'm looking at Parting Gust as just like a great card, 2-mana removal. I was surprised looking at the list, actually. There's so many good removal spells in this set. I mean, there's a lot of good removal.
There's 2 white pips, though. You're immediately committing. Like, there's been several times I've played like a vintage style cube where it's like I have committed to like a double white pipped card because everyone always includes those crazy like stacks pieces. I'm like, why can't I cast any of these cards? The second pip. Why did this happen? But yeah,
this cube doesn't have a ton of fixing either.
Also something I'm thinking about. In the limited set, it didn't have any. And so I'm like, I don't know how much should be in there. Defy the spirit of the cube if I want this to feel like limited, if it doesn't have a lot of fixing. I don't know. So
yeah, so I think Parting Gust, I can't resist a blink spell. Come on.
Right.
So that is really high for me. But also Bria, just reading this card is like, man, prowess is everything prowess, makes your stuff unblockable. That card's strong. And Otter is just so fun. I love Spellslinger. So I think I'm on Parting Gust or Bria.
I have to resist a lot of like my more Timmy like feelings where I'm like, I feel like I've been burned a little too many times by picking a 2-color too early. And it's like, but I would also say as a new drafter, I also don't know. I did like a chaos draft where my first pack was like a Lord of the Rings pack. I had a Gandalf and I was like, I don't know. It was the Izzet Gandalf, and I was like, I don't know, I could just never draw another good like red or blue spell. But it's like, of course that's possible. But you're right. I think Bria at the cost does a lot of stuff. That seems strong to me. I'm trying to think about what like a comparison because like Corpseberry, no. Imperial Eagle, no. Like Sugarcoat, no. It's like they're all like good like second picks, third picks, fourth picks. And that's like something I'm like kind of like thinking about too, just in general, is like, does every card need to be a snap pick? No, some cards are kind of fill in. I feel like sometimes vintage feels like, oh, every card has to be like a 10 out of 10 banger card. And it's like, well, some cards are allowed to suck a little bit. Some cards are allowed to be a little bad or conditional or specific or have specific uses. So I'm like, people are probably going to be like, last pick, like a Corpseberry Cultivator. And I'm like, oh, that means he's not worth having. It's like, he might show up at some point. He might do his job. So
he's a cute little guy with his berries.
Yeah. So I stick very much in like a monocolor spectrum. Like I try to stay like at least somewhat narrow in that way and then allow myself to kind of wheel into different colors from there.
So everyone definitely let us know what you would pick from this pack. It's a pretty powerful pack. I think it's got a lot of cool directions. And yeah, Tyler, thank you so much for coming on. It's been great talking with you. Anything you want to say before we wrap up here?
No, I would just say if you're ever in the Cincinnati area, every Friday, 6:30 at Gather All in Norwood, we're drafting up something.
Yeah, definitely everyone check that out and reach out to Tyler. And if you happen to be in the area of Avon, Connecticut or that area, we always are cubing pretty often at Games IRL. So definitely reach out to me if you want to come cube in Connecticut. And of course, ConnectiCube, like I mentioned before. And thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Tyler, for coming on. And I hope you all have a great day.
Bye.